later on. I was just doing commencement work, so I was looking at growth rates of Teraticornis in south east Queensland, and I said to AI, okay, what's the data? Give me some figures. Then I took its references. I've got a way of communicating all of that as to how I want things to do. I took the references and I said, so precisely what do these references say? Completely different approach about growth rates of Eucalyptus teraticornis. And the first one, she said, well, this doesn't even exist. This is entirely fabricated. So
I've got a small question about teraticornis. Do you think they're a resilient species?
Resilient?
Yeah, tough.
Yes,
you know.
I do. And the reason I say that is they occur in lower rainfall areas down to sort of 600 or so mils, and they occur in Papua New Guinea.
And in a wide range of conditions.
Yes. And so what they don't like is very wet feet.
Okay.
Okay, so if you look at the red gums in Sydney in the 1 in 100 zone, very few Teraticornis more amplifolias. Having said that, one of the best Teraticornis I can think of in terms of its characteristics, so within any genome, you've got a lot of variation. So this one's got a very weepy leaf, fine, narrow leaf, and so it looks quite visually pleasing, and it's right beside a creek.
Right.
So, and a creek that gets flooded.
The reason that I asked is that I had a court case a couple of years ago, and one of the reasons that my counterpart's evidence was preferred to my own was on this question of the resilience of Teraticornis. And I'm like, yeah, they're tough as goat's knees. And he's saying, well, no, they're not. And I didn't have any peer-reviewed published papers to back my argument up. And so my counterpart's evidence was preferred.
Yes, and look, that's hard. And it's hard to get evidence often of what you want. So where you can't get peer-reviewed evidence, then my response was, yes, let's look at its distribution, and that'll give us an idea about what it's capable of dealing with. And it really is a broad range of climatic conditions. It is probably the second most widely distributed and probably the most common species.
Yeah, it is very common. Anyway,
so
it still rankles.
Common, even though
it still rankles with me.
Well, camaldulensis is broader spread.
Yeah,
much more diverse range even still, but always within that riparian association. And as a result, the sheer numbers of camaldulensis are probably nowhere near as high as the sheer numbers of Teraticornis.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's pure numbers and distribution tell you that it's fairly resilient. It's not, it doesn't generally like really wet conditions, and it doesn't like extremely dry conditions. But that's about the limit. That's not too bad a limit. I mean, you see it west of the divide. It's probably the most common east of the divide. So that gives
Do you get it occurring naturally west of the divide?
Yeah, it occurs west of the divide. I'm pretty sure.
Because I mean, when I drive around, I look at gum trees not near here, and I see something that looks like I think I might know it, but it's like, well, there's so many, it's probably not that, you know.
I'm just looking up its distribution now. Obviously, I'm looking it up, but I'm doing it on PlantNet, and yes, it occurs west of the divide.
Yeah, right.
I'm just using New South Wales, and obviously that'll change. I wonder, I should be able to get it out of Euclid as well. Yeah, so it's broadly spread, and as I said, goes all the way up to Papua New Guinea. So
yeah, I knew it was in Papua New Guinea.
Okay, well, Peter, we might as well start recording.
Yep, I'm recording.
Okay, good. So, nice and quiet evening this evening, which is lovely. I'm hoping that we'll get out within the 45-minute range, but happy to go longer if the demand exists. And I have a series of questions by Lisa Barnes. The first one is just a real doozer, and I'll answer it appropriately. I've been told that trichoderma is a mycophagous fungi. That is, it's a fungi that feeds another fungi. Trichoderma comes out of dormancy at a lower temperatures than Phytophthora. Would applying trichoderma in winter give it a head start over Phytophthora by allowing early establishment before spring conditions favour pathogen activity? The answer is I don't know. I love it. But I'm going to give you some thoughts on it all the same. First of all, I don't know that how significant trichoderma is as a competitor, and you could do some work on that. Just do a search, trichoderma for control of.
I thought it was fairly widely used these days as a control for Phytophthora, especially in tree crops like avocados.
Oh, it may well be, but I don't know about that, Peter. So I'm happy to do a quick search on that now, just so we again have the answer.
Yeah, my understanding, I've been away from the cutting edge for a few years now, but my understanding is that they've gone away from phosphonic acid because you have to inject it, which has got its own problems, and moving more to trichoderma.
Yeah, indeed, they are using it to manage Phytophthora, so that makes sense, although not quite, because again, remember that Phytophthora, whilst we talk about it as being a fungi, and when I started, it was definitely a fungi. Nowadays, it's been moved into its own little group, the Oomycetes. That
yeah, but that's a bit like saying wood ducks aren't ducks. They're not ducks; they're geese. But you know, they look like a duck. They taste pretty good when you cook them up like a duck.
Yeah, look, it is a little bit like that, except the cell wall of a Oomycete is cellulose, largely cellulose, and that is very different to chitin. So the enzymatic processes will be different. And so
but if the trichoderma still attacks them successfully, then
yeah, then that's great.
Kind of doesn't matter.
So to answer Lisa's question is, I would imagine that having a broad range of fungi and having a broad healthy environment is probably the first key component. That is, in general, mulch is shown to be antagonistic towards Phytophthora.
Yep.
And that's because you've got a whole pile of these good saprophytic fungi that are territorial in part. And so the enzymatic processes tend to be antagonistic to what we call secondary metabolites. So if you think about it, just picture that piece of bread with mold on it, and you'll look at it and it's in rings. And the first ring is where the activity is greatest, the inside, and then it's spreading out. And what it's really doing is bring these secondary metabolites to pre-process things, and also to say, this is my territory.
Yep.
And if you remember, we've talked about it before, that's one of those things that we use in development of drugs, antibiotics, and also in developing certain insecticides and things like that. And if I remember, I might be wrong, ivermectin maybe even, which is ivermectin, is one of those products that's either a second metabolite of bacteria or a fungi. So yes, I imagine that getting it down is half of, but it's got to have something a substrate to be doing well on. So my gut level feeling is that mulch is still a critical component of that, because there'll be fungi within the mulch that it will also be able to take advantage of. And if you've got a colony that's breeding well, that will be important. The other thing I'll say on it is that they looked at using trichoderma on what used to be Fertilisation
noxious,
which is now Pyoderma noxious. They looked at using that, and what Schwarzer and Hallam found was that you really needed to have the isolate that was appropriate for that fungi. So you tend to get the trichoderma has a fair genetic range, and if you don't have an appropriate range, it doesn't have the same impact as if it has the same range.
I read that paper that they published, and it seemed like, yes, you are absolutely correct, but only in degrees. So there was better efficacy with matched strains, but you still got an effect and a benefit from the strains that weren't matched.
That's right. And the other thing to keep in mind is Fertilisation is, or Pyoderma is, really a vigorous pathogen. It's a primary pathogen in the first degree. It almost certainly spells the death of its host. Phytophthora is considered in many circumstances to be a primary pathogen, but really in many of our tree species, it's not so bad. It's horrible in avocado, for example, but there's a specimen down at the University of Western Sydney, Richmond TAFE campus of Platanus that's had Phytophthora now for probably 25 years, and the tree continues along. I've seen Phytophthora kill ficus, but I've often seen Phytophthora just not even get going, really. You'll get a section die off and then the fig will take back over. So I think there's definitely advantages in slowing down the Phytophthora, retarding it, and essentially that's what it's going to do. Any of these biological controls will never eradicate their host for a whole pile of reasons. First of them all, it was so vigorous that it wiped out all its host, it would kill itself.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, I think timing, and I think just making sure there's enough support there. Trying to put it on when there's no support will be more problematic, I suspect. And a good thing to go, just do some research on and try and get some papers.
Yep. Thank you.
Next one. What are the most common pest diseases and or disorders you encounter? So I will apologize first of all by saying that pest diseases and disorders have all been combined into the one thing now, diseases. So pests are the bigger living things. Diseases are generally, in the old terms, are the infectious type things, and disorders are everything else. And there is logic in that division in the way that we see things, but there's also logic in the more liberal approach to medicine that's coming through now, that we have followed through in our unit guides and our direction in terms of arboriculture here in Australia. And that is, somebody with alcoholism, for example, doesn't have a pest, and they don't have a infectious thing. You could argue that it's a disorder, and that's fair enough, but it's really a disease that affects the way the person functions and does things. So that's the broader terms. Most common living things that cause problems that aren't diseases, so that pest group,
people and possums.
Possums and people, Peter. People first, possums second. You're absolutely right. And I'm hard to say, but I can almost take down a subset of people, and arborists are one of those big subsets. The number of things that arborists do that just make my head spin. So over pruning is not uncommon as a thing. The next one would be the phloem feeding beetle larvae, in particular the Longicorn thoracantha. It's pretty well common in most places in Australia, everywhere I can think of. So that's a painful pest of really stressed or trees that are having a hard time. And I say to clients all the time, look, getting a little bit of borer damage is like us getting a cold, not a problem. Us getting pneumonia, major problem. Us, getting influenza, bigger problem. A cold, standard flu, not quite so bad. So I think we've got to think of that beetle as that. There's a whole pile of leaf-feeding beetles. The ones that have been more problematic are some of the newer Crismillidae, the Ptospharum beetle, which will attack Berseria and a few other trees in that group, and a lot of the smaller ornamental Ptospharums that are used for hedges have problems with it. Lily pilly leaf beetle, it's had some problems. Another one that causes real grief for us is psyllids. And they cause grief because they cause damage to the leaves and can often, over 3 or 4 years, inflict enough damage they'll kill the host. But that's nothing compared with a really far less frequent but more severe phasmatid stick insect outbreak. And there have been several of those recorded, wiping off tens of thousands of acres of land.
Wow.
It's hard to imagine which is what in terms of things, but they're less common but more problematic. And I think that's a part of the issue. The things that we see more commonly are a little bit easier. In terms of diseases, those infectious things, Phytophthora is up there. Fortunately, the nasty ones, malaria for us down here is not so much a problem. They exist, but it takes a fair bit to get a colony going. And as yet, we don't have Phylinus noxious, which is nice. There's not too many other diseases of trees that are overly problematic and commonplace. Disorders, I guess dehydration or water stress would be number one. In that, you could also have chemical poisoning. I mean, November's always great for somebody wanting to use a bindi treatment. You've had a sort of warm month or so, the soil's dry, you apply your dicamba, first rain comes, and then you have a tree that's got issues. None of them are predominantly Sydney-based. Phylinus is more a problem for Queensland, although it is down south of Grafton, and the earlier suggestions were that it would hit Coffs Harbour over time. Some revised thoughts on that have been it'll hit Port Macquarie over time. And as I mentioned before, I suspect just localised areas, you'll find it hitting some of the coastal areas, Sydney and maybe even south of Sydney over time. Which tree diseases are most commonly misdiagnosed by arborists? I don't know that there's anything that's commonly misdiagnosed by arborists. I think there's lots of things that aren't diagnosed by arborists more than misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
What's some examples of that, Mark?
Well, there's generally, think about it.
You're thinking about things like lightning strike or something like that.
Yeah, lightning strike is missed, and it's often not an arborist issue. It's just that it's hard to pick the subtle cues, particularly if you've got a rough bark tree where you get no Lichtenberg figures. For those of you who don't know, let me share my screen. If I can do that, I should be able to. Yeah, I know. Don't share the entire screen, so I'll do it. So there are Lichtenberg figures on people. This is a Lichtenberg figure on wood using temperature, but let me just, I've seen it on cattle, which is funny. And I'd love it, you know, if lightning were to hit me and I get a nice tattoo like that, I think it's pretty good. There's it on grassland. So they can sometimes be very hard to see if they're there. And so you get a strike that's not very bad. So remember, lightning doesn't kill by the biggest impact comes from the shock wave. The shock wave that's created by air expanding rapidly as it comes from inside to outside the tree, and that air comes back in together. And that pressure wave is what does most of the damage. There is some damage done, but it's far less by rapid expansion, and it's generally not the bigger issue. So if you get a really mild strike, and that'll occur, for example, with a lower intensity strike, when there's rain and the tree's got a lot of dirt or debris on the outside. In those sort of circumstances, the dirt and debris help conduct the electricity, so it does less damage. Likewise, whenever you're looking and you think, well, could it be lightning strike? You've really got to look around for metallic objects that could arc things out on. And fences, wires, and things of that sort of nature, overhead conductors, anything that will allow the electricity to jump a little bit and get grounded are often used. So you may see, and I've got some photographs of it, the top of I think there's one in the MIS that will be coming out. The top of the tree, you can see the dead branch, and then it comes down to about level with the power lines, and then nothing more is dead. And you wonder, well, why did that die? You've just got to think, well, okay, it only had to jump about 1/2 a meter, and then those electrical conductors far better at getting the power to ground than the rest of the tree. So that becomes a thing. So yeah, lightning strikes hard. Possum damage can be hard to identify. Poisoning, particularly sublethal poisoning or poisoning in general, is hard. You can often pick a poison tree where herbicide has been used by a number of things, how the leaf performs, but then you can see crinkling of the leaves from mites. So a lot of these things have similarities. And in fact, in the MIS, there's a table, a really useful table that talks about the symptoms and what things could cause that. And so when you've got 2 or 3 symptoms, that really does aid you, because you can sort of say, well, that's a symptom of mites and sap-sucking insects and lightning. And the next one says, well, that's a symptom of a root fungus or lightning. Oh, hang on a second. Lightning's in both of them. So lightning will be my first thing I want to think about.
Which MIS is that?
This is the MIS for diagnosed tree diseases. I just, my part of rewriting the document, I took 2 weeks and finally finished off that review. I had some great feedback. I think I mentioned that last ArborMentor, that process had been going on, and I found it very challenging and quite rewarding. because people would say, well, how about, and what about this? And, you know, I had, I think, 8 pages there from Dr. Greg Moore, some sort of more scathing comments from others about things that needed to be done or didn't need to be done. And I've got it at the stage now where it's ready to go back to the New Zealand counterpart. They've got a few little sections to finish off. I wrote one section for them just on some of their issues. They have a few bacterial issues in New Zealand we don't have in Australia. So and it was just easy enough for me to do that rather than them. But they'll need to record some of their major or most common pests. So as an arborist, my most common misdiagnosed thing, possums, it's just sometimes hard to imagine what they can do, but I'm you know, I've seen enough of it now. Sublethal poisoning, I've seen enough of it now. So it's about experience. It's about getting your eye in and feeling comfortable with that process. And you know, that one that we did a couple of ArborMentors ago of the herbicide damage on the gymnosperms, you know, it could have easily been misdiagnosed. And in fact, if you'd asked me my first thoughts, the answer was a gall. Then my next one was insect gall. My next one was fungal gall. Both of those I could eliminate just by using a box knife or a Stanley knife. I think you all know what I'm talking about. I don't have one here. I've got one in the office though.
Yeah.
And cutting thin slices and looking at it. I used a digital microscope, but you know, a hand lens or even a macro lens on most of your phones nowadays will do a good enough job to see that it wasn't fungal. And then finally started to put 2 and 2 together that it had to have been chemical. And what chemical would do this? The answer is something that played around with the hormones. And so your auxin imitating herbicides then became the primary focus. So I started looking at what that did. And once I found an image of the swelling of the union between the stem and the leaf or needle on a pinus that was all swollen, I thought, yep, I have a fair idea. And that went back to Sean, who'd sent it to me and asked me. Sean went back to his client, and his client said, yep, we confess we've used a herbicide and clearly we've applied it incorrectly. So I think soil, fine soil, solute issues, things like phosphates shortages or excesses, magnesium shortage and excesses, those things are often assumptively diagnosed. And in many ways, I understand, you know, I've got a pomelo at the moment, a large tropical fruit citrus that's got a very pale chlorotic area of growth on it at the moment. And my first thing is, well, let me spray some Epsom salts onto the foliage and see what it does.
Mark, would you know off the top of your head what magnesium shortage in palm trees, Canary Island palm trees would look like?
No, but I do know what. Well, yeah, no, not shortage, but excess. You get some marginal scoring, and there's a publication. I'm pretty sure it's called Nutrient Deficiencies in Palms. I'm just trying to go off memory. But our big one in palms, boron, is often associated with a wilting top. In fact, I can probably show you what that looks like. And let me. The publication I'm thinking of was done by Broschat out of I think it was the University of Florida, but palm.
How do you spell that, Mark? Broschat.
It is.
How do you spell Broschat?
Oh,
CHET or something?
yeah, you can't ask me that. Sorry. I'm just seeing whether I had a copy of it still here. I used to have a copy of one of his books here. I can't look it up for you though, but we'll find it in a few seconds regardless.
Thanks.
Magnesium deficiency.
We just had a client who claimed that he had a magnesium, I think, magnesium deficiency in palms, and I sort of thought, well, I don't know. I haven't seen a soil test.
This is your typical magnesium deficiency. It's just piling out of the end of the leaflets. But in the older leaves, that's not to be unexpected. Okay? And so that's getting a little heavy. But again, the ideal way to do it, and so I remember when this came out, oh, look at this. There's a lovely little one. 5 most common nutrient deficiencies in palms: healthy palm, potassium deficiency, magnesium deficiency, manganese deficiency, nitrogen deficiency, iron deficiency. That gives you a little good common one there. Don't know who produced that and whether it's how accurate it is, but it's pretty consistent with general leaf problems of trees. So I imagine it's fairly close. I think many years ago, and I apologize to the class I did that for, I used cannabis leaves because there was a lot of work on cannabis that showed you the difference in the process. And so there's another one there. Again, I apologize, but I'm not on Pinterest, but it gives you an idea of the sort of things you're looking at. And you can see how magnesium and iron and zinc all look fairly similar. Manganese is not too dissimilar, so you've just got to be careful when you're punting, because sometimes an excess can be as equally as problematic as a shortage. So in a perfect world, I would tell you that you should get a soil test done and then adjust your soil based on that soil and tissue test. One of the things that we find difficult is just because there's a deficiency in the soil doesn't mean there's going to be a gross deficiency in the plant. So we've got to keep that in mind. Here's a nice one of manganese deficiency, frizzle top. And then boron deficiency gives you a weeping head. Boron's one of those wonderful chemicals that's just in such small numbers, you can very quickly screw the whole thing up. So you want to be careful again, under or over application. And usually by this stage, by the time you see it like this, it's usually fatal. And you see it all over the place. And what causes things to go out in terms of boron, I have no idea. It's just one of those things. And then again, our research on woody plants is not as well done as our research on crops. We've got better information on wheat and things like that, less information on trees. But the good news is most of these, the time we're looking at trees, the trees have been in the ground and growing for quite some time. And if they've been growing for quite some time, then these problems have either eliminated the tree already or the tree is suitable to that growing environment. So where you do need to ask it is when something goes out suddenly. If you're seeing a tree, like you're saying, Peter, the palms with a problem, why now? What's happened? What's changed?
And why just that palm in a group of hundreds?
Yeah, and it's a phoenix. My first concern would be obviously Fusarium oxysporum.
Yeah, I thought that too, but they prune this palm farm, and I'm pretty sure they don't sterilize in between cutting. So if it was Fusarium, you'd expect it to be right throughout the whole plantation.
Eventually, yes, but again, it doesn't mean it's not one of the earlier ones to get it.
Yeah, right. And
I think they're crazy not sterilizing between palms. We know Fusarium oxysporum's there. I think any palm pruning sterilizing your soil in between palms regardless. So there's some anecdotal evidence out of the US, Arizona and California, and then out of Sydney that talks about Fusarium getting into Washingtonia species. I suspect they were heavily stressed palms, but all the same, I think it's just asking for problems. Does that make good sense?
Yeah, it does.
And look,
We've invited that client to have a discussion with us about the potential for Fusarium and haven't got a response, so that's their problem.
Yeah, look, it's difficult. We're dealing, so if we talk about medicine, and medicine is a really good analogy. I have a friend recently who had a son that wasn't doing well, couldn't quite figure out, got a diagnosis, wasn't really happy, things weren't going right. And one of my favorite sayings, can you remember it, Peter? Diagnosis?
I'm not quite sure what that one is.
Diagnosis is a process, not an event.
Oh, yeah.
We tend to think of diagnosis, the doctor's given me a diagnosis, it's finished. And my favorite story about that was my doctor had a client that came in with a headache on a Saturday morning, told to go home, take some Panadol, sleep it off. If things got worse, let him know. So late on the Sunday afternoon, he called the doctor, or his wife called the doctor and said, look, he's just getting worse. He's got a splitting headache. He can't keep anything down, and he's developed a rash. Well, before he'd got to the hospital, he was dead. He had a meningitis infection. Had he taken heed that take some Panadol and things hadn't settled down within 4 hours, the answer would be, look, go to a hospital and get a checkup. Because we don't have a little port like our car's got that you can plug a little computer into. We don't have a diagnostometer where you can say, oh, yes, this is what's wrong. And it's the same with trees. Now, the problem for us is we're not dealing with one organism. We're dealing with thousands, at least hundreds. There'd be very few arborists anywhere that aren't dealing with 100 or more species. And if each of those have 10 diseases that are unique or somewhat unique to them, you can see how, and that's just, major things, minor genetic things, all hell could break loose. So it's really important. A part of the diagnostic process is to say, look, this is what I think it is. This is what I expect to happen. So I think the tree is being overgrazed by possums. You're in Victoria. Great. If you're in Victoria and you're being overgrazed by possums, brush tail, we've identified it. We can capture them, take them down to the local vet and have them euthanized. The problem's persisting. Well, then clearly it wasn't possums. And that's the process. If I give you a prognosis, I'm saying, if you do this, this is what we expect to happen next. And that helps you in the diagnostic process. If something doesn't turn out right, then it gives you feedback that you either need to do more investigation or consider more in the process. And the classic of it, if you ever want to watch a series that works through this medical diagnosis process, it's Dr. House. You go from one thing to another to another. That was what the episodes were based on. But that's literally how it should work. And so I'll say that to you all personally. If you've gone to a doctor and the doctor says, look, take these and everything should be better in 3 or 4 days, and 3 or 4 days later it's not, there's nothing wrong with the doctor's diagnosis. It's the part of the process. The fault is you are sitting there saying, well, I'm not going to go back to him because he doesn't know, rather than saying, I'm going to go back to them or him or her with more information, with new information. And that
when I go to the doctor, they say, what's wrong with you? And you tell them.
Well, you're actually giving them signs and symptoms. And that's important, again, because they've got nothing to plug in. And so it's the same when you're dealing with a a tree, when you're looking at it, you're saying, well, what do I need to know? What's changed? So I looked at a dead tree and another tree beside on Friday morning. Let me pull up the images. And the very first question I asked, sorry, Friday was a big day. I ended up halfway around the country. So I walked into this here, a dead Angophora and a live Angophora. Clearly a lot of work had been done. My first question was, when did the works occur? When did you build? When did the staircase go in? When was the grass terrace at the front done? All of those were the initial questions, because that was going to be critical. I know the tree died from Phoracantha, a longicorn beetle, one of the phloem feeders, because there's lots of evidence of it. Why did it succumb? The answer is usually those beetles do their most damage when the tree's stressed. What stressed the tree? I don't know. Could have been environmental. I suspect it was in a small garden on a heavily sloped block, as you can see. And so I suspect there was limited resources. That's my gut level suspicion. But there could have been any one of 100 things in that situation that had caused that to happen. Then I looked at this and I said, yes, I know what's happened here. No, that's not borers, that's axe damage. And if you look carefully, you can see sharp cutting. And so he said, yeah, I was trying to get out the borers. I said, okay, well, that's not the way to do it. But you can see the limited garden. It's not brilliant or ideal. And it's interesting to note, we often hear about the damaged trees do. The retaining wall on the other side here is cracked, as you can see, and there's no trees in that garden bed at all. It just simply wasn't constructed to deal with things. So my answer was the tree's dead. The cause couldn't be determined. There are several possible stressors that could have been there. Climatic conditions, one of them, competition from the other tree and the other plants is another potential one. Having said that, Angophora costata is usually fairly robust and will almost develop a malleeform in coastal areas, and certainly its growth rate will slow right down.
I didn't see any mulch on those trees, Mark. So
yeah, there's some mulch around the base there, Peter.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, again, nothing spectacular, but this tree had no major issues. The biggest problem it faced is the client, in fear of having another tree die from borers, started to become the borer himself. And those sort of things are going to happen. If I wanted to say what things do arborists most misdetermine or calculate, the answer is risk. Arborists tend to be overly concerned about risk statistically. And I know I showed many of you the marble presentation going back a while ago. Do you all recall that?
Yep.
So I've been trying to look at other ways to communicate. And I thought one of the problems with marbles is it's a cubic volume. And we don't think cubically. So I thought, okay, maybe I'd do it in an area. You can fit 10 marbles on your hand. You can fit 100 marbles on the top of a laptop, and so on. So you'd had concepts. And I thought the problem is, it's still parabolic. It's still square, and so again, it misleads. So then I said, well, how about linear? How about if we did it linear? And I have a linear example that'll help you really get the process. If I were to have trees spaced 10 meters apart on a street, that's pretty typical. A couple of trees in front of most 20-meter frontages, not uncommon. I could start in Perth and end up in Christchurch and find one tree that posed a high, an unacceptable risk, so a risk that was higher than the risk associated with driving. That's a pretty interesting cross comparison, isn't it?
Mm.
So the next question then is, how long would that take me to walk?
Well, hopefully you do a drive-by or a fly-by.
Yeah, but you can see the problem. You can see the problem when somebody says to you, look, I just had a look and there are 10 trees that have got an unacceptable risk in that street. You think, okay. And I saw one not so long ago where the arborist said there were 3 trees out of 5 or 6 at the end of a cul-de-sac. And I thought, boy, you know, to give you the comparison again, the most eastern part of France, all the way to the most western part of France to the most eastern part of China, you'd expect to find 2 if you walked in a straight line looking at 1 tree every 10 meters. Just incredibly small numbers. Now you can figure out the other side. That would have been 200 trees that posed a risk that required some immediate response. Or from Perth to Christchurch, about 100 trees. That's not what I'm seeing risk assessments come back at. So, and, you know, again, I worry sometimes that I'm
talking about risk assessments, Mark. I recall we went to a training day in Perth recently.
Yes.
Do we have any thoughts on the efficacy of that particular model?
I found it difficult, and
are we going to look at it in any detail?
I think it needs to settle itself down and have more things published with it to make it clear as to what it's doing. And the biggest concern I have at the moment is I think it's more complex than QTRA. I think it is, I mean, it's got some good things in it. I'm not going to say it's all bad, but it's so hard to figure out how you're going to handle it and what it means. And then training's been delivered in half a day. QTRA is 2 days, Valid's 1 day, but David has done a great job of putting calibration into his app. So it's hard to push.
Yeah, if you deliberately get things wrong, then it's obvious. Whereas with these complicated methods, it's easy to make small adjustments.
It's easier to make small adjustments when you're multiplying 3 things together and you tweak 2 out of the 3, you're 100 times.
Get whatever result you like. Yeah, well, that's right.
Well, I don't think you know, some people will push it to get the results they like. I'm sure of that.
Or just get an inappropriate result.
Yes, I think there's a tendency to do that. And I think one of the, and I don't want to mention the direct products, but there's some software out there that uses GIS and has QTRA built into it. And it also comes not just with the numbers, but with words that describe those numbers. And as we looked at a short while ago, that creates problems. The CIA looked at that, and there's some research done that just showed you when you ask people what things like highly unlikely means, it means a whole range of things. And so the comfort we find with the qualitative systems is, yeah, I think this is a medium risk tree, or I think this is a high risk tree. But what do those terms mean? It's so vague.
But, you know, when we're talking about trees, people tend to be, or there's a large cohort of people who are risk averse. So they're looking for things that results that will back up that prejudice. Whereas, you know, if you go and talk to people at the race course, they all think they're going to win.
Oh yeah,
despite the maths.
And again,
talk to
it's
people tree management, and they all think that, well, this is an exaggeration, but a lot of people think that they're going to die from a tree falling on them, and it's that perception that is colouring it. And when you've got when you've got a system that allows those errors to accumulate, then you get problems with the results.
yeah, and I think there's certainly a broader perception in society that trees pose a much higher risk than they do. And the converse is true, Peter, and this is because we don't do well with this process of understanding that risk is exponential. It's a log 10 curve. And so, you say,
is the risk exponential, or is our method of dealing with it exponential?
No, risk is, it's in, so, we think in terms of linear as people, but if I want to know the risk of mortality from youth suicide, for example, I can look that up in a table and it's a statistical answer.
But it's
sorry?
It's a ratio, the risk is 1 in whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It's a 1 in. And the problem with 1 ins is when you're thinking linearly, you've got 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 100. When you're thinking logarithmic, you've got 1 in 100, 1 in 1, 1 in 10, 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 1 in, and the numbers just keep going down. And I just did one for a client in just a brief teleconference today, and I said, look, the tree's been rated at this by the first arborist that looked at it. The second arborist has said, well, the risk is unacceptable. And I said, so I looked at the track system and it comes out moderate. And I said, but let me give you an idea where I think that moderate is. I said, it's somewhere between 1 in 40 and 1 in 400 million. And whilst that's moderate, I'm not at all concerned about a risk that small.
But did you say 1 in 40 to 1 in
400 million? 1 in 40 million to 1 in 400 million.
That range is useless because it's meaningless.
No, that range is log 10. It simply says that it fits within that range. And yes, it's big because the numbers are big, but in fact it's tiny because it's an invert. So you couldn't perceive the difference. And that's the problem with log thinking is, 1 in 10, I can see what 1 in 10 looks like. I get that. 1 in 100 gets difficult, and that's why I've been trying to figure out ways, how do I communicate what 1 in 5,000 looks like, or 1 in 50,000, or 1 in 500,000. And so the two distances I was giving you earlier was 1 in 500,000. That's 10-meter interval is Perth to Christchurch. A 1 in 5,000 is finding 100 trees on that path. It is just small numbers. And yes, the numbers are, and this is a problem. The problem, Peter, as you say, is numbers. Lots of arborists aren't numerate. Lots of arborists feel, oh, this is all difficult, and understandably, they're right. From what their education has provided for them, that they're not equipped to deal with it. On the other hand,
my issue is that with these methods that use inputs that talk about things rather than enumerate them, is that those inputs are fuzzy. So
yes.
Not understanding the outcomes, because the outcomes are plainly discussed. If the risk is low, track says you may consider doing something, which is problematic in itself, but that the outcomes are clearly, spoken to. But it's the inputs that I've got the problem with. And I think the better risk methods address that and tighten that up and make it more difficult to make errors in the inputs by having simple, and by having it easy to check.
So there are things. So at the moment, the submission is before Standards Australia. I will let you know when we get the answers to what they say we can or can't do in terms of that. But that's one of the things that I know was put out there to consider from risk is the input should be clear. We should know what this person. It's an assumption. I don't have any problems with two people having a different assumption. But tell me what that assumption is.
A branch landing on a car, that's entirely different to the tree landing on the road, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's so the one I was looking at with that client today, Peter, is a hollow tree. It's had some termites, got some decay, got a lean. The lean's natural. The hollow's under 35%. Sorry, under 50%. So it's under the TR ratio. Why would you be significantly concerned about the tree failing? So, you know, and then what's the target? Well, if the target's a building and a building hasn't been harmed, and the requirement under law in New South Wales is for the trees disputes between neighbours to make a decision, it's got to be a real and foreseeable risk in the near future, not just some, you know, pie in the sky thing. Well, what's real and perceivable? And the back case is one of those things that starts to give us some hooks to hang on that. You know, it's certainly a 1 in a million event is a nothingness. A 1 in 100,000 events, probably not anything either, considering that a 1 in 400 events, the likelihood of me dying from cancer on an annual basis. That's scary. So it's difficult, and that's why we like those qualitative assessments, is because the words are familiar, they're comfortable, and we don't, you know, we can all agree the tree's got a medium,
and they can mean whatever you want them to mean.
It's not that they can, it's that they do. And I did this experiment 3 times with classes. 3 times I took out to see a particular tree. We looked at it using Mathanian-Clark's numbering system. You got a fairly high degree of agreement. Then we used descriptors to describe that, high, medium, and low. And we got a little less agreement on that. And then we said, okay, what does that mean numerically? And the answers were just absurd. You know, they were so broad that some people thought a low risk was something that was 1 in 100, and other people thought that low risk, that was risk of mortality. Some people thought of a high risk of mortality was 1 in a million. You know, and I'm thinking, well, I don't want to tell you about cancer, and I certainly don't want to talk to you about driving. So, and so another thing that I wrote in that article with Mark Stewart and Doug O'Callaghan was that we really do need to benchmark risk when we're communicating it. Even if you don't know where that medium is, if you tell people that the average tree poses a risk of harm or risk of mortality of about 1 in 10 million, and that you're as likely to die from not chewing your food properly as you are to be killed by a tree, who's going to stop eating food? Who's going to?
I thought the risk from not chewing food probably was a lot higher than that, Mark.
So the risk from choking?
Yeah,
it is. What we've eliminated out is the predominant causes. So young, extremely old, so 6 to 66 is the cohort, and no severe physical disability that would affect your ability to swallow. So there's a whole pile of health or disease issues there that are eliminated, and not inebriated. Inebriation significantly increases your risk of dying from choking.
But not from being hit by a tree, I would assume.
Well, it might, but at least you'll be enjoying yourself when you're dead. The answer is the risk.
I think that raises another issue when you're talking about these numbers that people find confusing in that, you know, how many people die from shark bites in Australia. The numbers are low, and whatever they are, I don't know what the numbers are, 4 a year, 10 a year, whatever it is.
1.6 if I remember, Peter, but yeah.
Yeah, but you know, when you can't compare that to tree deaths, because we are in and around trees all the time, most of us. But if you don't go in the water, you're really unlikely to be bitten by a shark, you know? I think we've had this discussion once.
Yeah, yeah, look. So just it's 2.3 at the moment. 2.7 to 3.
But if you analyze it and thought about, well, how much time do people actually spend in the water where they could potentially interact with sharks compared to the amount of time people could interact with trees, then that would give a better picture, I think, about.
Yeah, look, so I just asked that, and it'll be interesting to see whether it comes up. Mortality rate per hour of exposure. And yeah, look, there has been some attempted work at looking at that. The numbers are fairly low.
But it makes it complicated and not easy to...
But it's the same with trees. The number of trees that fall over, realistically, you've got to ask that next question. How many people are, whilst they're near trees all the time, how many people are directly under trees in a position where they could be harmed in conditions when failure is likely to occur? And the answer is really small numbers.
Somebody called me today talking about a tree in a development site, a gum tree in a development site, and they were worried about branches falling on them. They said, oh, you know, these gum trees are known to fail. They're widowmakers. And my rejoinder was, well, if it's a widowmaker, it's doing a really bad job, because where's all the widows?
Yeah, the numbers are low. And that's all of these things are like that. Now, you know, and again, having things that people can put a comparison to does help. Now, sharks, it's a horrible, you know, worried about that. It must have been crocodiles. That was the lower one. But, you know, more people are killed by horses every year than by sharks. And I'm going to guess that people spend less time exposed to horses than they do to sharks. That means overall, horses are a lot more dangerous. And
mosquitoes are more dangerous still, aren't they?
No, not in Australia, because we don't have too many nasty diseases, unfortunately.
Well, worldwide. I thought that was most dangerous.
Yeah, worldwide. Well, people still the most dangerous animal. Just looking up here, saltwater crocodiles, less than 1 death a year, and yet I don't know whether you remember, but we had a Queensland politician regularly coming out and saying you needed to get rid of the crocodiles and need to relocate them. The numbers are small. I'm just looking up here, geographic hotspots. Northern Territories had 19, Queensland 19, 3 in Western Australia. That's really not a huge number. And almost always, it's people being where they shouldn't be.
But that's right. People don't go and swim with crocodiles generally because there's signs.
Having said that, I won't name and shame to any great extent, but a magnificent author of a fantastic publication called The Plant Messiah talks about going and collecting samples. And I got to spend some time with somebody who'd worked with him, and he said, you know, they're out in the middle of the Northern Territory, and there's a lagoon, and in he goes without even thinking a second time to collect a rare water lily. And I'm thinking, yeah, it's got more courage than I've got. So people.
I also thought that groups of people, you know, going into crocodile areas are more robust. They're less likely to attack a group of people. So,
well, maybe, but certainly the good thing is if you're going to do it and you go in with 4 people, all of a sudden the odds are 1 in 4 that you're going to be the rather than if you're the only one there and it happens, you're the one. And of course, that's my common joke with shark attacks.
Sharks.
We should really if you're worried about sharks, you should go and take a friend with you. It halves the likelihood that you're going to be taken, because multiple fatalities from sharks are just rare as hen's teeth. So yes, and then it's not a matter of whether you can swim faster. That sort of joke always comes out. It's simply a numbers game. Whoever gets bitten first goes, but now at least it's 50% less likely to be me. So yes, I think that's an area where arborists will continue to struggle for some time, and hopefully the Australian standard will help, if it's accepted as something to be developed. Hopefully it will help.
I hope that some of these issues are clarified somewhat, because these things that we've been talking about are complex and difficult to wrap your head around.
Yeah, look, some things will be. The important thing, I think, is that it communicates better and it's easier to audit and review a risk assessment. I mean, I've seen several risk assessments that simply say the tree is dangerous. And that's the assessment. I've seen assessments, just finished reviewing one on Thursday of last week, and the assessment says, you know, in my opinion, the risk is much higher than this. And that was the assessment.
Well, isn't that,
you know, as a review of another arborist, I'm sitting there thinking, well, the first arborist said the risk is low. What's much higher? Is it moderate? Is it high, or is it extreme?
Isn't that one of the dozen or so risk methods, though, the subjective method? I think.
No, what they're really doing is identifying a hazard at that, in my mind. They're simply saying, this is something that stands out than the norm. Now I need to know the implications of that.
You need to assess the size of the part in the target. But it's like
you need to assess how likely the target's going to be there, how likely the part is going to fail, and the consequence of that occurring.
Well, I think if the new standard sets that out and gives a guideline, then it's a useful thing to do, because
it's certainly in the. So I've seen the outline, and the outline does give, I think, improved guidance about communicating it, so that even if you've formed an opinion and used track, if you haven't told me why you think the likelihood of impact is high, or whatever it is, it might be, it's not high. I don't think they use the word high. Sorry, I just have to pull up a folder. Likelihood of impact, yeah, high. You know, greater than 50%. Frequent and full exposure, or constant and full exposure. I want to know how you got to that. If there's an awning that protects the tree over the footpath that the person's going to be on.
We saw something like that in a recent conference a year or two ago, where a commissioner, whatever they call him, from Victoria, a person gave a talk, and as part of his talk, he said it was obvious these branches were dangerous.
Yep. Now, in fairness, he was a legal professional, but it certainly demonstrates
he's a decision maker.
Yeah, I know. He was a commissioner, and it does show the dilemmas in communication. I have
so if somebody that's, you know, supposedly well educated and well read and has numerous resources at his disposal.
Oh, Peter, you're a sad man. If you think the legal fraternity have any understanding of risk, you're sadly misled. They don't. They understand being an advocate. They understand arguing, and they understand making things look better or worse than they are, because that's their job. They don't really care what is.
Yeah, but if you can't rely on somebody that's supposedly well read and educated to be a bit more critical thinking, how do you expect to be good at it? Like, you know.
Look, let me. Yeah. I
We're
could
not all
go on for
knuckle
half an hour on
draggers.
this.
We're not all knuckle draggers, Mark. Some of us are intelligent and think about things and care deeply.
Yes, look, people are, the legal fraternity is intelligent, but often the way that they think has been coloured by the way that things are communicated. And I've said this before, arborists are notorious at not being able to communicate risk. And a part of that is we've spent, by the time we start doing risk assessments, we've spent more than half of our working lives on average thinking of risk in terms of high, medium and low.
I don't know, Mark. I think that, you know, part of the problem has got to be the tools that are at our disposal, and these qualitative risk assessments that are basically meaningless and can be so easily get it wrong by the inputs. That's huge part of the problem.
It is, Peter. And it's interesting. It's a part of the problem with risk assessment, not just in the tree industry, but in all sectors of work health and safety. And it's a difficult one to deal with. And there's been discussions about, for example, the use of the matrix type thinking, which is essentially what
The qualitative system.
the basic tree risk assessment is just a likelihood times consequence done over twice. There's work that shows that it's often worse than just guessing.
Yeah, well, I published a paper looking at that stuff, as you know.
Yeah, and look, so you're not talking about new stuff. It's how to communicate it, and risk communication. There's a professor of risk communication in the UK. That's all he does, all day long. How do I communicate it? And I was on the weekend. I had some bacon for breakfast, and we talked about a micromort. 2 pieces of bacon. That's one micromort. A micromort's 1/1,000,000th of a life. That's an estimated way of trying to communicate these risks. And if you look at a tree and the risk associated with the average tree, it's a small portion of a micromort. We're talking about the average person, if you spread that risk over everything, would be less than a minute, whereas if you talk about bacon, I think it was about 20 or 30 minutes of your life for 2 slices of bacon.
So are you saying that you can equate a couple of slices of bacon to losing 20 minutes of your life? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's just a way of trying to say, look, if you spread that risk over everyone, what would be the loss of life expectancy from eating those 2 pieces of bacon?
So if you have enough pieces of bacon, you could expect to die in the next 10 minutes, though.
Well, we did it in the early days, if you remember, with smoking. And we said, smoking shortens your life. And then we'd say, this is the length of life for a person who smoked, and this is the length of life for a person not. It was a way of trying to communicate to people that smoking takes away life. Now, the dilemma with that is, again, people don't understand risk. So they say, well, hang on a second, and I'll tell you the story. My great-grandfather smoked a pipe every day that he was an adult and didn't die until he was 99, got some pain crossing the Harbour Bridge, realised that he had a gallbladder problem, so they opened him up, and can you believe it? He was riddled with cancer. So they said, look, that's it, I'm not going to operate. And that was it. Died the following day.
So smoking did kill him.
But yeah, didn't shorten his life. Well, I don't know. Fred might have lived to 110 if he hadn't smoked.
Yeah, or 250.
And yes, just because you've got an outlier doesn't mean that everyone's going to do the same.
That's right. I had a old lady who lived up the road I used to garden for when I was a kid, and she smoked like a chimney until she died in her late 90s.
Yeah, so it's this problem of how we communicate risk. That's all. It's difficult. And certainly, if the Australian standard goes ahead, it will set out guidelines on what should and what must be included to communicate that, at least from a review point of view. If you tell me that, you're looking at, well, I think we looked at one on ArborMentor going back beginning of the year or end of last year, a shyness and the risk to a telegraph pole. And I couldn't believe the risk assessment. I thought, wow.
Is that the one where the risk was assessed to the road?
Oh, it was assessed to the footpath and to the telegraph pole, yeah. And I'm sitting there thinking, no, a branch breaking off on the pepper tree won't damage the telegraph pole at all. Doesn't matter how you do it.
And I would like to see the standard use must and will a lot, rather than
there's things in standards about how we write them, and there are things that are normative. They're the shalls, and then the things that are guidance, and they're the shoulds.
So I'd like to see a lot more, a lot of normatives.
It's a document produced by consensus.
As much as possible, I mean, it needs to be, because consent authorities will get those documents and say, oh, here it says da-da-da, so therefore you must comply. Whereas
so to give you something, and it may not
wishy-washy, good if you like, or it may, then there's just so much wriggle room. Document loses efficacy.
Yeah, look, that's right. There is some loss because there needs to be some accounting for variables. But for example, my view, and this is just my view, it may not be what the standard says, but the risk assessment method used in a formal risk report must be disclosed.
Yes,
that's really simple.
That's a start.
Yeah, and so there will definitely be things like that. But here's the question: does every risk assessment need to have a formal risk report produced?
No.
And so,
but it should be disclosed somewhere.
Well, in my view, a risk assessment should include written notes, but it's not shall, because you might go out to have a person look.
Okay.
I wouldn't worry about that tree at all. No, you don't need to go through all the process. That's fine. Mind you, I think that should include written notes, but it's a should, not a shall. And so there'll be areas where, but it should consider the three core elements. And the three core elements are the likely, it should disclose the target of concern, the feature or issue of concern. It should state, the report must go through these processes. It needs to disclose the assessment of how likely the part is to fail, how likely it is to impact the target of concern, and the likely consequence of the target being hit.
So I'm just saying I would like to see more of those normative.
Yeah, I think everyone that works with standards would like that. Having said that,
how it lands is obviously a matter for the committee.
Yeah, look, and there are some things that's really easy to come up with and say, this is a must or this is a shall. And things like, how long should a baby capsule be used for? No more than 5 years. Okay, well, great. I see sometimes it's done beautifully. For example, I had a bus at one stage. Peter, I think you might have even seen my bus. And I used that to take students out on a Saturday, and I had to have a fire extinguisher in it, and that was fine. I was happy to have a fire extinguisher, and the fire extinguisher had to be inspected twice a year. And I remember going down to our largest fire company in Sydney and saying to them, look, I need to get this fire extinguisher checked. And he said, this is crazy. And I said to him, what do you mean? He said, yeah, that's what the standard says. Got to have it checked twice a year. I said, what's the likelihood of the gauge failing? He said, about 1 in a million. I said, and so we're testing it, and the likely event that a fire occurs on a bus that maybe is 1 in 10,000, and the gauge fails, that's 1 in a million. The numbers now are starting to get just ridiculously small. The people that really liked the shalls were the people that do the inspections.
Mm.
And I think we've got to be careful not to write standards to produce income for arborists. We need to write standards to get the best outcome for society as a whole.
So that's right, and that's a subtle argument, and
and that's where the shoulds and shalls start to become difficult. You know, should every tree be recorded on a development site? No, just those that are likely to be affected by the development.